Welcome to Time Before Us, the channel where ancient history breathes again. Before time had a name, before the first human breath, there existed a world fierce, forgotten, and alive. Creatures of scale and silence, predators wrapped in feathers, titans that shook the earth, lives erased, bones buried beneath eternity. But they are not lost, they are waiting. This is Time Before Us, where prehistory worlds rise again, and the stories buried in stone finally speak. Chapter 1. The lizard lie. When the very first dinosaur fossils were discovered, no one had the faintest idea what they were looking at. Enormous bones embedded in stone. Teeth the size of kitchen knives. Creatures unlike anything still walking. The Earth, to 19th century scientists, it was like stumbling into a prehistoric crime scene with no witnesses, no suspects, just the bones of a mystery millions of years cold. So what did they do? They looked around at the biggest, scariest animals they did know: reptiles, lizards, crocodiles. That was the framework, the only comparison they had. The name dinosaur itself, coined in 1842 by British paleontologist Richard Owen, literally means terrible lizard. From that moment forward, the mold was set. Dinosaurs were scaled, cold-blooded, lizard-like giants from a bygone age. But here's the problem: that image? It was based more on imagination than evidence. Early reconstructions were guesswork at best, and laughably wrong at worst. Take Iguanodon, one of the first dinosaurs ever named. The original skeleton was incomplete, and scientists mistakenly mounted a conical thumb spike on its nose, like a rhino horn. It stood upright like a kangaroo, a posture we now know was completely inaccurate. But at the time, no one questioned it. Because, well, what else could a giant fossilized reptile be if not a supersized lizard? This foundational error shaped everything that followed. Artists illustrated dinosaurs as low-slung, tail-dragging beasts. Museums built towering statues with elephantine legs and alligator skin. Textbooks described them as sluggish, swamp-dwelling reptiles, more akin to Komodo dragons than anything you'd see flying or chirping outside your window today. And perhaps most influential of all movies, starting with The Lost World in 1925, and later cemented by Jurassic Park in 1993, dinosaurs were shown as roaring monsters with thick, scaly hides. They hissed, they bellowed, and they definitely didn't have feathers. For generations, that image went completely unchallenged by the public. Because why would you doubt it? It looked cool. It felt right. It was everywhere. But paleontology was slowly beginning to whisper a different story. Even in the early 1900s, scientists started to notice oddities. Dinosaurs had light, hollow bones, more like birds than reptiles. Some had three-toed limbs and wishbones, and their posture? Far more dynamic and upright than any cold-blooded lizard. Yet these clues were often brushed aside as coincidences or evolutionary dead ends. The idea of a warm-blooded, active dinosaur? Too radical. The idea that they might have had feathers? Downright heretical. Why was the resistance so strong? Partly, it was tradition. Once a visual standard is set, especially one backed by museums, movies, and a century of artwork, it becomes very hard to dislodge. It's not just a scientific theory anymore. It's a cultural image. And when science threatens that image, people push back, even scientists themselves. Another reason? The fossil record is notoriously incomplete. Feathers, being delicate structures, rarely fossilize. So unless you're extremely lucky, they don't show up. And for decades, we weren't lucky. Most of the fossils we had came from North America and Europe, where preservation conditions weren't ideal for soft tissues. No feathers, no problem, just scales and bone. But in hindsight, the clues were always there. In the 1960s and 70s, a wave of rebellious paleontologists began challenging the old dogma. Most notably, a young scientist named John H. Ostrom. made a startling connection. The skeleton of Deinonychus, a fierce predator with a curved killing claw, looked strikingly bird-like. Not just in its limbs and bones, but in its agility, its likely metabolism, and even its brain. He proposed that maybe, just maybe, birds weren't just related to dinosaurs. They were dinosaurs. This idea, known as the dinosaur-bird hypothesis, was initially treated as fringe science. But it opened the door to a much bigger question. If birds evolved from dinosaurs, then doesn't that mean some dinosaurs had feathers? Still, without direct fossil proof, it remained just a theory. A fascinating one, but a hard sell to the general public, and to many scientists still clinging to the terrible lizard paradigm. All of that would change in the coming decades, because in the dusty hills of northeastern China, hidden beneath layers of volcanic ash, were fossils waiting to be found. Fossils that didn't just hint at feathers. They preserved them, but we'll get to that soon. The truth is, the image of the scaly, cold-blooded dinosaur was never a fact. It was a guess. A deeply embedded one, backed by inertia and repetition, not data. And it took generations of careful, painful unlearning to begin seeing what was really there all along. So the next time someone tells you dinosaurs were giant lizards, you'll know the truth. They weren't. They were something far more fascinating. And the real story? It's just beginning. Chapter 2. Feathers in stone. For years, paleontologists stared at stone and tried to imagine flesh. They could see the bones, sometimes beautiful, sometimes broken, but everything else had to be guessed. What color? Was the skin? Did it have lips, scales, spikes, feathers? All of that, left to the artist's brush and the scientist's hunch. But every once in a while, nature gives us a miracle. A fossil so exquisitely preserved, it shows not just the skeleton, but the soft stuff, the textures, the outlines, the imprints that don't normally survive deep time. These are called exceptional fossils, and they're rare beyond words. Yet they are the very things that shattered the illusion of the scaly dinosaur. The first real crack in the lizard-like armor came in the form of a single, strange fossil unearthed in Germany in the 1860s. Its name? Archaeopteryx. To this day, it remains one of the most famous and most misunderstood fossils in the world. Archaeopteryx was small, about the size of a raven. It had claws on its wings, a long bony tail, teeth in its mouth, all very dinosaur-like traits. But around those arms and along the tail were unmistakable impressions of flight feathers. This wasn't just a bird. And it wasn't just a dinosaur. It was something in between. At first, scientists weren't sure what to do with it. Some said it was a bird. Others argued it was a reptile. But almost no one saw it for what it truly was. A missing link, a bridge between ancient theropods and modern avians. It was a feathered dinosaur hiding in plain sight. Yet despite its significance, Archaeopteryx was often treated as a weird exception, not a clue to something larger. Why? Because for decades after its discovery, it remained a lonely fossil. No other dinosaurs with feathers showed up. Scientists had nothing to compare it to. So it was placed in a museum, admired, and largely forgotten by the mainstream. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and everything began to shift. In the 1990s, in the Liaoning province of northeastern China, farmers began uncovering fossils in shale quarries that looked unlike anything seen before. These were not just bones. They had soft tissue outlines, skin textures, and sometimes, impossibly, feathers. And these weren't birds. These were dinosaurs. One of the first game changers was a small creature named Velociraptors. When its fossil was first examined in 1996, it showed a halo of delicate filaments surrounding the skeleton, a kind of fuzzy down, primitive feathers. It was the first non-avian dinosaur ever found with confirmed feather-like structures. And it opened the floodgates. Velociraptors was a comet. The meteor was coming. Over the next few years, More and more species were pulled from the rocks. Caudipteryx, with full fan-like tail feathers. Protarchaeoptery, with symmetrical wing feathers. Epiosaurus, Microraptor, and eventually Utaranus. A massive predator with filamentous feathers running down its body like a prehistoric lion's mane. These were no longer isolated accidents. This was a pattern, one that could no longer be ignored. But not everyone welcomed the change. Some scientists initially argued that the filaments weren't feathers at all. Maybe they were just decayed collagen fibers or skin impressions. But under microscopic analysis, the structures were found to have the same branching patterns as modern feathers. Some even preserved melanosomes, the pigment cells that give feathers their color. That's right. Not only could we see the feathers, we could tell what color they were. It was no longer a theory. It was fossilized fact. Still, many people, including influential scientists, filmmakers, and museum curators, hesitated. Changing the public's image of dinosaurs meant rewriting textbooks, redesigning exhibits, and perhaps most painfully, confronting decades of error. Feathers, to some, made dinosaurs look silly, less fearsome, too bird-like. The majestic monsters of the past were suddenly starting to resemble chickens, but that hesitation was based on aesthetics, not science. And science was speaking loudly now, through layers of volcanic ash and perfect preservation. What made Liaoning so special? The region had experienced massive volcanic eruptions during the early Cretaceous period, roughly 125 million years ago. When dinosaurs and other creatures died in these ancient forests and lakes, ash and silt covered their bodies quickly, sealing them in an oxygen-deprived tomb that preserved even the most fragile structures. These weren't just skeletons anymore. They were snapshots in time, and they told a radically different story. Even more astonishing, some of the fossils showed multiple layers of feathering, short down close to the body for insulation, longer display feathers on limbs and tails. Some may have used their feathers for gliding. Others had wings but couldn't fly. Still others, like Utaranus, were large ground dwellers that likely used feathers for warmth or display. It was a revolution. And it was accelerating. The more fossils we found, the more the old scaly image crumbled. The lizard was dead. In its place stood something far more vivid, a lineage of animals that was warm-blooded, active, intelligent, and often wrapped in a coat of colorful fluff. Feathers weren't an evolutionary afterthought. They were central to what many dinosaurs were, and yet, there were still bigger surprises ahead, because while many of these discoveries centered on smaller, bird-like species, scientists began to wonder, could the big boys, the iconic giants, like Velociraptor and even T-Rex, have had feathers too? That's the question we'll explore next. Chapter 3. The Archaeopteryx enigma had teeth, clawed fingers, a long bony tail. But it also had feathers, real asymmetrical flight. Feathers. Was it a bird, a dinosaur, or something in between? That fossil was Archaeopteryx, and ever since its discovery, it's been stuck in the middle of a scientific identity crisis. The year was 1861, just 2 years after Darwin published on the origin of species. A fossil turned up in the limestone quarries of Solnhofen, Germany, a region known for preserving delicate creatures like jellyfish and dragonflies in stunning detail. But this one was different. It was reptilian and avian all at once, and it blew minds. Archaeopteryx wasn't just a new species. It was a potential missing link, a tangible stone-cast bridge between birds and reptiles. For scientists in the 19th century, it was like looking at evolution in action, frozen mid-step. It had feathered wings, yes, but also teeth in its beak, clawed fingers extending from its wings. A long-tail vertebrae, not the stubby pygostyle found in modern birds. It walked on 2 legs, just like a small theropod dinosaur. And it didn't have a breastbone strong enough for powerful flapping flight, suggesting it was gliding, or maybe a poor flyer at best. This combination was baffling. Darwin's supporters embraced it as evolutionary gold, but others weren't ready. Some scientists couldn't accept the idea of one group of animals transforming into another. Evolution was still highly controversial. And Archaeopteryx became a pawn in that larger debate. So what did people do? They classified it as a bird. End of story. For decades, it sat neatly in the avian section of museums, treated as the first bird, the spark that lit the evolutionary fuse. But that neat little label began to unravel as more theropod dinosaurs were discovered, especially those with increasingly bird-like traits. Here's where things get interesting. In the 1970s and 80s, paleontologists began noticing a growing number of similarities between theropods, especially dromaeosaurs, and birds. Hollow bones, three-toed limbs, wishbones, air sacs, lungs structured for high-efficiency breathing, even nesting behaviors. By the time we entered the 1990s and beyond, feathered dinosaurs started appearing in the fossil record, and they weren't birds. That meant feathers came before birds, which meant that Archaeopteryx, it wasn't so much the first bird as it was just one of many feathered dinosaurs. So where does that leave it? Today, most scientists believe Archaeopteryx sits somewhere in a gray zone, a transitional form, possibly not even a direct ancestor of modern birds, but a close cousin. It's like a snapshot of evolution experimenting with flight, not quite there, but trying. It's worth noting that more than a dozen Archaeopteryx specimens have been discovered over the years, some better preserved than others. One of them, found in 2011 and nicknamed the Thermopolis specimen, helped clarify a critical detail. The fossil showed that Archaeopteryx had flight feathers on its legs, forming what's been called a four-winged body plan, similar to Microraptor, another feathered dinosaur from China. So if this creature had feathers on its arms and legs, but couldn't quite fly like a bird, what was it doing? Many scientists think it was a glider, leaping from tree to tree using those feathery limbs to slow its fall or steer like a parachute. Others argue it could flap weakly and fly short distances. But either way, it was clear. Flight didn't emerge suddenly. It evolved gradually through stages, from fuzzy insulation to display feathers, to gliding to controlled flapping flight. And Archaeopteryx? It was caught right in the middle of that progression. The problem is, it was also caught in the middle of public perception, because for over 100 years, it was used as the textbook example of bird evolution, the single bridge between two worlds. But the truth is, evolution is rarely a neat line. It's a messy branching tree. Archaeopteryx wasn't the only feathered dinosaur trying to take to the skies. It was part of a whole diverse ecosystem of early avian-like dinosaurs. And while it still holds its place as a critical discovery, it's no longer the first or the only example of this transition. In fact, many newer fossils from China and Mongolia show even more advanced features than Archaeopteryx, making it less of a blueprint and more of a fascinating evolutionary experiment. Still, there's something magical about that first specimen. Too. See a stone slab over 150 million years old, with those delicate flight feathers perfectly outlined in limestone. It's like holding a fossilized whisper. A moment when dinosaurs were dreaming of the sky. And maybe what's most poetic about it all is this. The reason Archaeopteryx was preserved so beautifully is because it died in just the right kind of place. Solnhofen was once a series of shallow lagoons surrounded by coral reefs. The waters were salty, stagnant, and low in oxygen, perfect for keeping scavengers and bacteria at bay. When Archaeopteryx died and sank into that sediment, the fine-grained mud locked in every contour, every barb on every feather. Nature handed us a time capsule. And for more than a century, we didn't quite know what we had. Today we do. Archaeopteryx wasn't a bird. It wasn't a dinosaur. It was both. And in that dual identity lies the secret to understanding how the age of dinosaurs never truly ended. It just took flight. Chapter 4. The Chinese Revolution. Sometimes, history isn't rewritten by a single discovery, but by an avalanche. And when it comes to the truth about feathered dinosaurs, that avalanche came roaring out of the hills of northeastern China. Welcome to Liaoning Province, a stretch of rugged land where sleepy towns once mined slate and stone and accidentally cracked open the doorway to an ancient lost world. In the 1990s, this unassuming region became the stage for one of the most dramatic scientific revolutions in modern times. And the catalyst? A burst of fossils so spectacular, so exquisitely preserved, that they didn't just nudge science forward. They forced it to change direction. These fossils didn't just suggest that dinosaurs had feathers. They proved it over and over again, in stone after stone, slab after slab. It was undeniable. And for some in the scientific world, it was also uncomfortable. Let's rewind. In the early 90s, local farmers in Liaoning were quarrying thin sheets of shale, perfect for building tiles, tables, or sidewalks. Nothing special. Until someone split open a rock and found something astonishing. A skeleton of a small animal, surrounded by delicate feather-like imprints. At first, it was assumed to be a bird. But then came the teeth, the long tail, the claws. These weren't avian features. This was something older. Something different. This was a dinosaur. And it wasn't an isolated find. Soon, more fossils turned up. Dozens, then hundreds. Many of them showing not just bones, but soft tissues, skin, feathers, even gut contents. The fine-grained volcanic ash had preserved the details with photographic precision, capturing a world long lost to time. The fossil that truly cracked open the dam was Velociraptor, discovered in 1996, a small bipedal predator about the size of a cat with a long striped tail and a mouth full of sharp teeth. But what stunned scientists were the fuzzy filaments covering its body. These weren't impressions of scales. They weren't decay artifacts. They were proto-feathers, simple hollow filaments akin to down. This was the first non-avian dinosaur ever discovered with direct evidence of feathers, not a bird, not a transitional form. A full-fledged dinosaur. It was a revelation and a controversy. Some experts tried to dismiss it. They claimed the feathers were just degraded skin fibers, or perhaps the remnants of collagen. But high-resolution microscopy told a different story. These filaments had the branching structure of early feathers. They were aligned with the animal's body in lifelike patterns, and they were consistent across multiple specimens. Then came Caudipteryx with symmetrical feathers on its tail and arms, too stubby for flight, but perfect for display. Then Protarchaeoptery, Bapiosaurus, Sinornithosaurus. The names piled up, each one a new piece of the puzzle, each one showing that feathers weren't some exotic adaptation unique to birds. They were common among theropods, widespread, maybe even ancestral. And then, like a mic drop from 125 million years ago, came Microraptor. This tiny predator, no bigger than a crow, had long flight feathers not just on its arms, but on its legs, forming a second pair of wings. It had an aerodynamic body and a long feathered tail for balance. It looked like a flying squirrel crossed with a magpie. And it may have glided from tree to tree in the dense, conifer-filled forests of early Cretaceous China. For the first time, we weren't just imagining what a feathered dinosaur might look like. We were looking at one, but perhaps no discovery hit harder than Yutyrannus walli, a name that means beautiful feathered tyrant. This animal was no chicken-sized sprinter. Yutyrannus was huge, about the length of a school bus, weighing as much as a hippo. It belonged to the same family as the mighty T-Rex, and it had something no one expected, a thick coat of feathers. Running down its back, arms, and tail, this upended everything. If such a large, robust predator could be feathered, then the long-standing theory that feathers only belonged on small, flight-adjacent species collapsed. Feathers weren't about size. They weren't just about flight. They were about thermoregulation, display, camouflage, maybe even communication. And if Uranus had feathers, it begged a tantalizing question. Could T-Rex, the most iconic dinosaur of all, have had? Then too, we'll get to that in a later chapter. But the Liaoning fossils didn't just show feathers. They preserved something even more miraculous: color. Under electron microscopes, scientists began spotting structures known as melanosums, the same pigment-containing organelles that give modern feathers their colors. By comparing fossil melanosums to those in living birds, paleontologists could reconstruct ancient plumage patterns. They found stripes on the tail of Dinosaurs, alternating bands of red and white, like a prehistoric candy cane. Velociraptor, it turned out, had iridescent black-blue feathers like a crow dipped in oil. Anchiornis, another feathered marvel, likely had a red crest, gray body, and black and white wings. These creatures weren't just covered in feathers. They were vibrant, vivid, and alive in ways we'd never imagined. The fossil beds even gave us insights into behavior. One slab showed an adult Psittacosaurus, a feathered, parrot-beaked herbivore, surrounded by a circle of juveniles. It may have been a parent protecting its young. Another fossil captured a dinosaur mid-sprint, its leg tendons frozen in action. And several specimens preserved stomach contents: lizards, fish, seeds, last meals sealed for eternity. And it wasn't just dinosaurs. The Liaoning ecosystem preserved mammals, frogs, early birds, insects, and plants in exquisite detail, creating a full picture of a prehistoric ecosystem. It was a snapshot of a lost world, a Jurassic diorama, preserved by luck and volcanic ash. But for all its wonders, Liaoning also forced scientists and the public to confront an uncomfortable truth. For over a century, dinosaurs had been shown as giant, scaly monsters. Hollywood clung to that vision. Museums were slow to adapt. And many people simply rejected the idea of feathered dinosaurs outright. They didn't look right. They weren't terrifying enough. They looked like overgrown chickens. And yet, the science was overwhelming. The feathered dinosaurs of Liaoning weren't speculative. They were preserved. They weren't artistic interpretations. They were photographic fossils. So why the resistance? Partly, it's inertia. It's hard to change a story once it's become cultural canon. But it also speaks to something deeper, our emotional connection to the creatures of our childhood. We fell in love with the roaring beasts of Jurassic Park, and now we were being asked to love something stranger, fluffier, and somehow more real. But here's the thing. These feathered dinosaurs weren't any less dangerous, or majestic, or awesome. In fact, they were more alive than any rubber-skinned monster could ever be. Because in Liaoning, we don't just see bones. We see muscles, feathers, color. We see lives, habits, deaths, families, food. We see dinosaurs not as monsters, but as animals, strange, complex, and beautiful. And if that makes them a little less like Godzilla, and a little more like birds, well, maybe that's the point, because the truth is, the age of dinosaurs never really ended. It simply took flight, right from these hills of ash and stone, where a farmer with a chisel split open a rock and found a secret hidden for 125 million years. Chapter 5. Meet the fuzzy raptor. You've seen it in movies, stalking through kitchens with sickle claws clicking like switchblades. You've seen it in video games, leaping onto prey with a lizard's hiss and a predator's grace. And you've probably heard the name whispered with awe: Velociraptor. But the creature you think you know, sleek, scaled, snarling, is not the creature that once stalked the deserts of ancient Mongolia. In fact, the real Velociraptor may surprise you, because it had feathers. Yes, real feathers, not a guess, not a theory, not a controversial claim. This was confirmed in 2007, when paleontologists uncovered a fossilized Velociraptor forearm in Mongolia, complete with quill knobs along the bone. These little bumps are the same structures found in modern birds, where ligaments anchor flight feathers to bone. It was direct, physical evidence. Velociraptor wasn't just a dinosaur with bird-like traits. It was a feathered animal, and just like that, the world's most iconic lizard raptor needed a makeover. But let's back up for a moment. Velociraptor was first discovered in 1923 during an American expedition to the Gobi Desert, a region rich in fossils but brutal in climate. The team, led by Roy Chapman Andrews, a real-life inspiration for Indiana Jones, uncovered a partial skeleton with a long curved claw on its second toe. That claw changed everything. It was sharp, crescent-shaped, and likely held off the ground while the dinosaur walked. This wasn't some plodding reptile. This was a predator built for precision. For decades, paleontologists argued about how it used the claw. Did it slash at prey? Pin it down? Stab like a dagger? Today, the prevailing theory is that it was used more like a grappling hook to hold onto prey, anchor itself, or deliver killing kicks. But that wasn't the only thing that made Velociraptor stand out. It was fast. Estimates suggest it could run at 25 to 40 kilometers per hour, 15 to 25 miles per hour. It had a stiff tail for balance, hollow bones, and sharp teeth for tearing meat. Its skull was low and narrow, with a curved snout and binocular vision, perfect for tracking prey. And its brain was proportionally large for a dinosaur, suggesting high intelligence. Not human level, of course, but enough for pack hunting, coordination, or complex behavior. In short, it was deadly, agile, and smart. But it was also small. The real Velociraptor was only about 6 feet long, stood just under 2 feet tall at the hip, and weighed around 30 pounds, about the size of a large turkey or medium dog. So where did the image of a man-sized, scaly raptor come from? Blame the movies, specifically Jurassic Park. The film's creators initially wanted to feature a larger species called Deinonychus, but decided that Velociraptor sounded cooler. So they scaled up the animal, made it sleek and reptilian, and burned that image into the global imagination. To be fair, it worked. The raptors of Jurassic Park are among the most iconic dinosaurs ever depicted on screen. But they also created a false legacy, one that scientists have been trying to correct ever since. Because the real Velociraptor, as we now know from multiple fossil finds, was feathered. Those feathers weren't ornamental guesses. They were as real as the claws and teeth. In addition to the 2007 quill knob discovery, Velociraptor also shared countless features with birds: a wishbone, furcula, 3-fingered hands, hollow bones, air sacs, and a posture that leaned forward, balanced by a stiff tail. It was, in every meaningful way, a ground-dwelling bird-like predator, more closely related to hawks than to lizards. So, what were those feathers for? Velociraptor couldn't fly. Its arms were too short, and it lacked the powerful breastbone needed for flapping. But feathers served plenty of other purposes: display, insulation, camouflage, even egg brooding. Some paleontologists think Velociraptor sat on its nest like a bird, spreading its feathered arms to shield its eggs, just like modern ospreys or penguins. And while we haven't found a full-bodied Velociraptor with plumage intact, we've seen dozens of its cousins with full feather coverage. Close relatives like Genuinelong, Sinornithosaurus, and Daguerreotarctor show beautifully preserved feathers across their arms, tails, and backs. These species were all dromaeosaurs, the same family as Velociraptor, and they point to a feathered ancestry that runs deep. So it's no longer a question of if Velociraptor had feathers. It's a question of how many and what kind. And here's where things get fun, because as more fossils emerge, a new image is taking shape, one that's even more fascinating than the scaly monster of Hollywood. Picture a sleek, agile predator its body covered in fine plumage with longer display feathers on its forearms and tail. Its face is narrow, beak-like in profile, with sharp teeth inside a mouth that's more bird than beast. Its eyes are forward-facing, alert, calculating. Its feet end in curved talons, tools of death honed by millions of years of evolution. It darts through undergrowth, stalking lizards or small mammals. It uses its feathers to regulate heat on chilly mornings and to signal dominance or courtship in mating season. It nests in shallow scrapes, guarding its eggs with parental care. It's alien, but it's familiar, it's beautiful. But dangerous. It's not the monster we imagined. It's something better. A real living animal that once hunted in the shadows of the Cretaceous. And maybe the most incredible thing. It left descendants. Velociraptors' family didn't end in extinction. It evolved, adapted, shrunk, lost its teeth, gained beaks. Eventually, its line soared into the sky, becoming the birds we see today. That robin on your fence? That hawk circling overhead? That pigeon strutting through a subway station? They're not just birds. They're the last living raptors. The raptor lineage never really vanished. It just transformed, leaving behind fossils like breadcrumbs waiting for us to notice. So yes, it's time to let go of the outdated image. The scaly, oversized velociraptor may have ruled the screen, but the real one ruled the Cretaceous in a very different way. It was fast, cunning, feathered, and far more interesting than fiction. And it's just one example of how our image of dinosaurs is still evolving. Because feathers weren't just on raptors, they may have covered giants, and that brings us to a truly jaw-dropping possibility, one that forces us to re-examine the king of dinosaurs himself. Chapter 6, the T-Rex feather debate. You've seen the image a million times, a towering beast, yellow eyes, knife-sized teeth, scaly, muscular, terrifying, the king. Tyrannosaurus Rex. But what if we told you that mighty T-Rex might not have looked the way you think? What if the most iconic predator in history was feathered? Yeah, we know. That idea either sparks your curiosity or sends you reeling. The notion of a fluffy T-Rex has ignited a war in the minds of dinosaur fans, scientists, and pop culture loyalists alike. But the debate isn't about Hollywood. It's about evidence, the bones, the skin impressions, the family tree. And it begins not with T-Rex itself, but with its relatives. Let's start with Yutyrannus, the game changer we met back in Chapter 4. This 30-foot-long, 3,000-pound tyrannosauroid from early Cretaceous China was fully feathered. It wasn't a maybe or a guess. Fossil impressions clearly showed a shaggy coat of filamentous feathers. Yutyrannus lived about 60 million years before T-Rex, but it was part of the same broader evolutionary family. So the discovery begged the obvious question: if its early cousins had feathers, why not T-Rex? It's not just Yutyrannus either. Other smaller tyrannosaurs, like Delong and Guanlong, also show signs of primitive feathers or feather-like structures. The family tree is sprinkled with fuzz that makes feathers a baseline trait for tyrannosaurs. And yet, when we turn our gaze back to the king, the fossil evidence becomes frustratingly vague. Let's dig in. T-Rex fossils are some of the best-studied dinosaur remains in the world. We've found dozens of skeletons, some nearly complete. We know its bone structure, musculature, even its growth patterns. And yes, we've found skin impressions. This is where it gets sticky. Some of those skin impressions, discovered around the tail, hip, and neck, show a pebbly, scaly texture. Think alligator skin, not feathers. That's been enough for many paleontologists to argue that adult T-Rex was largely scaly, at least in certain areas. But here's the twist. Scales in one area of the body don't rule out feathers elsewhere. Think of a modern-day bird like an eagle. Its legs, scaly. Its chest and back, fully feathered. Or take the Hoatzin chick of South America. a bird that has clawed wings as a juvenile. Evolution doesn't always erase traits neatly. It mixes them. So what if T-Rex was a hybrid of both? Some scientists propose that juvenile T-Rexes were feathered for insulation, much like baby birds or chicks today. As they grew and their bodies became massive, they may have lost feathers in favor of scales, which are better for heat shedding. After all, large animals have a harder time staying cool. Think of elephants or rhinos, thick-skinned, but hairless. Others suggest that T-Rex might have had patches of feathers, maybe along the spine, the arms, or the tail. Not a full coat, but enough to serve a function: display, insulation, or even intimidation. Picture this: a 40-foot-long predator with a shaggy crest down its neck, feathered tufts around the eyes, a patchy mane running down its spine. It's not fluffy, it's majestic. Like a lion, not a plush toy. Still, the debate rages. Why is it so hard to find definitive proof? While feather preservation is rare, it requires very specific conditions: fine-grained sediment, low oxygen, fast burial. The vast majority of T-Rex fossils come from places that don't preserve feathers well, like Montana and South Dakota. So absence of feather impressions doesn't equal proof of absence. It just means we haven't found the right kind of fossil yet. And here's something wild: if T-Rex did have feathers, that would make it less unusual, not more. Because by the late Cretaceous, feathered dinosaurs were everywhere. Raptors, oviraptors, ornithomimids, even smaller ceratopsians and tyrannosauroids had plumage. Feathers weren't just a flight innovation. They were a toolbox of evolutionary advantages: camouflage, courtship, thermoregulation, species identification, display. And if a turkey uses its tail feathers to intimidate, why not a tyrant king? Yet even among scientists, opinions are split. Some insist on the scaly T-Rex, others lean toward a partial feathered model. A few brave paleotists go full plumage, envisioning a king in shaggy black or rust-colored feathers, more like a monstrous cassowary than a lizard god. The truth? We're still searching, but there are hints. And they're growing. Take Dinosaurs, a close relative that lived in North America just a few million years before T-Rex. It was a dromaeosaur, a raptor, but huge, around 16 feet long. And it had fully developed wing feathers. If Velociraptor had them, and Utaranus had them, and juvenile tyrannosaurs probably had them, then feathering wasn't an exception. It was a norm. There's also the evolutionary bottleneck theory. As tyrannosaurs got larger, feathers became less necessary. Just like modern mammals lose fur in the tropics, large theropods might have shed feathers as their size alone helped regulate body heat. But here's where it gets philosophical. Maybe the point isn't whether T-Rex had feathers. Maybe the point is, why do we care so much? Because this debate isn't just about biology, it's about identity. It's about what dinosaurs mean to us. We've built an entire mythology around them. And T-Rex stands at the peak of that mythology, untouchable. Scaly, kingly feathers challenge that. They humanize the monster. They make it feel more like a real animal, something connected to life as we know it. Something fallible, vulnerable, evolved. And maybe that's uncomfortable, because it means the T-Rex isn't a cinematic monster. It's better than that. It's real. The truth is, the T-Rex feather debate is ongoing and probably will be for years. Until someone finds that perfect fossil. Until that one discovery in the right sediment, with the right preservation, under the right conditions, reveals what we've been guessing at all along. But even if we never find it, the question itself has value, because it forces us to reimagine, to update, to evolve, just like the creatures we study. And in the meantime, we can look at modern birds, crows, hawks, ostriches, and know we're still walking among dinosaurs. Not just their bones. Not just their ghosts. Their descendants. Chapter 7. The feathered giants. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a truly giant dinosaur. Not a raptor, not a chicken-sized microraptor, but a behemoth. Maybe 30 feet long, 10 feet tall at the hip, weighing more than a car. Clawed hands, powerful jaws. A body built for brute strength. Now, give it feathers. Seems wrong, right? That's the mental disconnect many people feel when we talk about feathered giants. After all, feathers are light, airy, delicate. They belong to birds or maybe small gliders. Not to massive carnivores that could crush bone with a single bite. But evolution doesn't care about our instincts, because the fossil record has made it increasingly clear. Feathers weren't just for the small and nimble. Some of the largest theropods, those bipedal meat-eating dinosaurs, also wore coats of proto-feathers. Not because they needed to fly, but because feathers were doing something else entirely. Let's go back to our star player, Yutyrannus wally. We've mentioned it before, but it's worth emphasizing again just how revolutionary this animal was. Yutyrannus lived about 125 million years ago in what is now Liaoning Province, China, the same fossil-rich area where so many feathered dinosaurs were found. It was a relative of T-Rex, but far older, and by Tyrannosaur standards, not yet at full king size. Still, it was massive, about 30 feet long, weighing over 1.5 tons, and fossil impressions showed clear evidence of filamentous feathers, up to 20 centimeters long, along its body, arms, and tail. These weren't just fluffy patches either. The distribution suggested widespread coverage, a full coat, that alone shattered the long-standing rulebook. Suddenly, the idea that large dinosaurs couldn't have feathers due to size constraints was off the table. Why did it have them? Insulation is the likely answer. Yutyrannus lived in a relatively cold, temperate environment with volcanic winters and frosty seasons. Feathers could have helped it conserve body heat, especially if it had some form of warm-blooded metabolism, which many theropods likely did. This makes sense. In modern ecosystems, large mammals like polar bears and musk oxen grow thick fur to survive freezing climates. Why wouldn't a cold-weather predator grow its own insulating layer, especially if its ancestors already had feathers? But the plot thickens, because Yutyrannus wasn't a one-off. There's also Bapiosaurus, another Chinese dinosaur from the early Cretaceous. It was a therizinosaur, a bizarre group of herbivorous theropods with long necks, huge claws, and feathers. Bapiosaurus was about 7 to 8 feet long and had proto-feathers along its neck and back. Later members of this group, like Therizinosaurus, grew to truly absurd proportions, up to 30 feet long, with claws over 3 feet long. We haven't yet found direct feather impressions for Therizinosaurus, but its close evolutionary ties to Bapiosaurus, along with other feathered therizinosaurs, strongly suggest it was plumed, at least in patches. Can you imagine it? A towering pot-bellied dinosaur with scythe-like claws, covered in shaggy feathers like some nightmarish muppet? That image is more accurate than you think. Then there's Dinosaurs, another member of the Weirdo Club. Discovered in Mongolia, Dinosaurs was a bulky, humpbacked, duck-billed omnivore with arms like booms and a tail like a spatula. Fossils suggest that at least part of its body, particularly its tail, was feathered. And again, it was massive. Over 30 feet long, and weighing more than 6 tons. So much for feathers being reserved for the delicate. Now, to be fair, these weren't the aerodynamic feathers you'd find on modern birds. They weren't optimized for flight. Many were simple filaments, proto-feathers, the evolutionary precursors to the structured veins we associate with modern wings. They wouldn't let these giants soar, but they could serve other purposes. Like what? Let's break it down. 1. Thermoregulation. The most obvious reason for feathers in large dinosaurs is insulation. Especially in colder climates, a coat of filaments could trap warm air close to the body, like a down jacket. This may have been crucial for dinosaurs with fast metabolisms or active lifestyles. 2. Display feathers are one of nature's flashiest accessories. Peacocks, birds of paradise, turkeys. In the prehistoric world, feathers could have been used to intimidate rivals, attract mates, or signal dominance. The dinosaur version of a lion's mane or a stag's antlers. And remember, many of these giants weren't carnivores. They were omnivores or herbivores. Feathers may have been a way to bluff their way through confrontation, to look bigger, scarier, or more attractive than they really were. 3. Camouflaged and underestimate the power of blending in. A feathered coat could help a large animal disappear into the shadows, especially in forested environments. Patterned plumage might have broken up their outline, making them harder to spot from a distance. 4. Protection feathers can protect against the elements: rain, snow, sunburn, even injury. Some modern birds grow bristle-like feathers to shield their eyes from debris or insects. A shaggy tail or crest could offer some defense in a tussle or during courtship battles. So the question isn't, why would a giant dinosaur have feathers? It's, why wouldn't it? The answer lies in our bias. We've been conditioned to see feathers as delicate, as bird things, as incompatible with brute strength. But evolution doesn't work that way. It retools traits for new jobs. Feathers didn't evolve for flight. They were exapted, borrowed and repurposed from earlier structures, probably used first for insulation or display. Once you embrace that, the whole idea of a feathered giant stops sounding strange and starts making perfect sense. That said, not all giant dinosaurs had feathers. So far, no feather impressions have been found in the truly enormous sauropods, the long-necked, long-tailed plant eaters like Brachiosaurus or Argentinosaurus. Their skin impressions show scales, and due to their sheer size, they may not have needed insulation at all. Think of elephants, so massive that overheating is more of a problem than staying warm. But in theropods, the evidence continues to grow. So if feathers didn't fly, they still spread, and they touched animals of all sizes from 2-pound gliders to 2-ton tyrants. That realization doesn't just rewrite the visuals of the past, but it reshapes the rules. Because it means dinosaurs weren't just scaly beasts. They were warm-blooded, colorful, dynamic animals with complex behaviors and bizarre adaptations, far more varied than we ever imagined. And maybe, just maybe, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. Because what happens when we stop assuming and start looking? Chapter 8. Flight before birds. Most of us grow up learning a tidy little story. Dinosaurs ruled the earth. Then they died, and then somehow birds took to the skies. But what if that's not quite how it happened? What if flight didn't evolve with birds at all, but long before them? What if there were dinosaurs gliding through prehistoric forests, millions of years before the first true bird ever flapped a wing? This is the overlooked beginning of flight, not a moment, but a messy, chaotic process of trial and error. A time when feathers weren't for flying, but for insulation, for display. And maybe, eventually, for catching air. To understand this story, we need to revisit a creature often hailed as the first bird, Archaeopteryx, discovered in the 1860s. In the limestone quarries of Germany, Archaeopteryx looked like the perfect evolutionary bridge, part bird, part reptile. It had teeth, clawed fingers, a long bony tail, but also flight feathers and a wishbone. A mosaic of past and future. For over a century, Archaeopteryx was the gold standard of avian evolution. The moment dinosaurs became birds, but that picture has cracked. Why? Because in the last 3 decades, paleontologists have unearthed dozens of other feathered dinosaurs, and some of them are even older than Archaeopteryx. And some of them could fly, or at least glide. That changes everything. Let's start with Micror, a PTOR. This little dinosaur, barely the size of a crow, was discovered in Liaoning, China, the same fossil bed that gave us Utaranus and Sinosauropteryx. But Microraptor was something truly special. It had feathers on its arms, legs, and tail. Long, stiff-veined feathers, the kind you see on modern birds. And it didn't just have wings, it had 4 of them. Scientists call it a tetrapteryx, a 4-winged animal. It's one of the best examples of a dinosaur experimenting with aerial mobility long before birds hit the scene. Did it flap? Probably not well. But it could glide, maybe even steer through the trees like a flying squirrel or a modern Draco lizard. And here's the kicker. Microraptor is older than Archaeopteryx, which means that the evolution of flight didn't start with birds. It started with non-avian dinosaurs. And Microraptor wasn't alone. There was Anchiornis, with long leg feathers and a streamlined body. And Yiki, perhaps the weirdest of them all. Yiki belonged to a group of small, strange dinosaurs called Scansoriopterigids. It had membranous wings stretched between elongated fingers. Think bat wings. But on a dinosaur. Its name literally means strange wing. Because it was feathers? Check. A body plan made for climbing trees? Check. And this weird arm membrane that looks more like a sugar glider or pterosaur than a bird? Double check. Yiki may not have been a successful flyer. Its wing structure was clumsy and inefficient. But that's exactly the point. It was part of nature's grand experiment. Flight didn't emerge in a straight line. It came from failures, from dozens of weird species testing out different methods of catching air. Membranes, feathers long. Tails, short tails, claws, kicks, glides. What worked stuck. What didn't? Extinct. And that's how evolution operates. Through trial and error. Through branches, not ladders. Imagine it. A late Jurassic forest, 160 million years ago. It's evening. The sun casts golden light through conifers. Somewhere in the canopy, a small feathered creature claws its way up a branch. It tenses, spreads. Its limbs, 4 feathered surfaces shimmering in the low light, and leaps. It doesn't flap. Not yet, but it glides, catching the air, steering toward the next tree, just long enough to evade predators and make it through the night. That's not a bird. That's a dinosaur. This idea that flight predates birds is reshaping the way scientists view the very definition of bird. If creatures like Microraptor and Anchiornis could glide or partially flap and lived before Archaeopteryx, then maybe the origin of birds is less about a single moment and more about a spectrum. Some scientists now argue that birds didn't evolve from dinosaurs in a single clean event. They were already dinosaurs, just with enough of the right traits to inherit the skies. And here's where things get even more exciting. Flight might have evolved more than once. Think about it. Yiki had bat-like wings, totally different from feathered flyers like Microraptor. What if multiple dinosaur lineages were experimenting with aerial lifestyles independently? We already know that other animals develop flight separately. Pterosaurs, bats, insects, birds. Why not multiple dinosaur groups trying the same? This opens up a wild, chaotic, creative picture of prehistoric skies, filled not with birds, but with an army of feathered dino gliders, each with different adaptations, different styles, different rules. Some would have been awkward, others graceful. All of them strange. So what does this mean for our understanding of birds? Well, it means that birds are just one result of a long evolutionary game. The successful one. They're the lineage that got it right, that streamlined their feathers, evolved stronger chests for flight muscles, lost their tails, fused their hands, hollowed their bones, and ultimately conquered the air. But they weren't the only ones to try. There were other flyers. Earlier ones. Stranger ones. And they left behind hints in stone. Flight feathers on the legs, quill knobs on arms, tails like rudders. and weird wrist bones designed to twist and tilt in midair. So when we say birds evolved from dinosaurs, that's true, but it's only part of the story. The bigger truth is this: flight evolved within dinosaurs, and birds are just the branch that never broke. So next time you see a pigeon hop off a curb and flutter into the air, don't think of it as a modern marvel. Think of it as the last survivor of an ancient revolution, one that began with gliders, crashers, climbers, and dreamers who launched themselves into the wind long before the first beak ever cracked an egg, because flight didn't begin with birds. It began with dinosaurs who dared to fall and learned to soar. Chapter 9. The bird within you. Hear it every day, in the chirping outside your window, in the whoosh of wings overhead, in the dawn chorus that breaks the silence of morning. Birdsong. It's comforting, it's familiar, it's normal. But what if every chirp, every flutter, every puffed out feather was a whisper from the prehistoric past? What if that robin on your fence wasn't just a bird, but a living, breathing dinosaur? This isn't poetic metaphor. This is biological reality. Birds are dinosaurs, not descended from them, not cousins to them, not like them. They are then. Let's unpack that, because this is the chapter where science flips your expectations, where the line between past and present vanishes. First, the basics. Birds belong to a group called aves. This group is nestled deep within a larger branch of the dinosaur family tree, the theropods. You've heard that word before. Theropods include Tyrannosaurus rex, Velociraptor, Allosaurus, all bipedal, mostly carnivorous, fast-moving predators. Birds didn't just evolve from that group, they are part of it. Their closest extinct relatives are not crocodiles or turtles or even other reptiles. They're Monoraptor and theropods, the group that includes raptors and their kin. Let's go anatomical. Birds have wishbones. So did dromaeosaurs like Velociraptor. Birds have hollow bones, a feature common among theropods. Birds have 3 forward-pointing toes and a reversed hallux, the perching toe, again, mirrored in many small dinosaurs. Even their egg-laying posture, clutch structure, and embryonic development resemble what's seen in fossilized dinosaur nests. And their feathers? That's the final thread that ties it all together. We used to think feathers were exclusive to birds. But as we now know, from Sinosauropteryx to Utaranus to Microraptor, feathers predate birds. They were inherited, not invented anew. Birds did was refine them. They specialized, optimized, streamlined. Their feathers became tools not just for warmth or display, but for true flight, coordinated, powered, dynamic flight. But feathers were already in the dinosaur playbook. Here's another shocker. Birds still have teeth genes. Modern birds don't grow teeth. Their beaks are keratin covered, specialized tools. But the genes responsible for growing teeth still exist in their DNA. They're just switched off. In lab settings, scientists have even reactivated those genes in chicken embryos, resulting in the growth of tooth-like structures in the beak. Same with tails. Birds have short tails capped by the pygostyle, a fused bone that supports tail feathers. But their ancient cousins had long, bony tails. That blueprint is still buried in bird genetics. Some chickens have even developed atavistic tails, throwbacks to their dinosaur ancestry. It's not just bones and DNA, either. It's behavior. Birds build nests. So did theropods like Oviraptor, whose name, by the way, is a misnomer. It means egg thief, but we now know it was sitting on its own nest, brooding its eggs like a modern bird. Birds preen. So did feathered dinosaurs. Birds perform mating dances, fluff their feathers, strut, chirp, and squawk. Fossil evidence and digital reconstructions suggest many dinosaurs may have done the same, with crests, tail fans, bright colors, or bizarre head ornaments used for display. Even the air sac system that helps birds breathe with such incredible efficiency, a system that fills their lungs with continuous airflow. Unlike our in and out method, shows up in the bones of theropods like Majungasaurus and T-Rex. What does that mean? It means birds aren't just what's left over after the dinosaurs went extinct. They are what dinosaurs became. That moment minus 66 million years ago, when the asteroid hit and wiped out nearly all large dinosaurs. It didn't kill them all. A handful of small feathered theropods survived. They were probably ground dwellers, small-bodied, fast-breeding, already warm-blooded, and likely capable of flight or at least gliding. Those survivors spread, adapted, filled the niches left behind. Over tens of millions of years, they radiated into over 10,000 species, from hummingbirds to hawks, from penguins to parrots. The age of dinosaurs didn't end. It evolved, and they're still with us. All around us, singing, hunting, nesting, migrating. The most successful dinosaurs in history are not extinct. They're alive and thriving. This realization reframes everything. When we look at a bird now, we're not just seeing a bird. We're seeing a window into the Mesozoic, a modern heron with its long neck and piercing stare, echoes of a Velociraptor's hunting style, a secretary bird stomping snakes on the African plains. Picture a two-legged predator doing the same 100 million years ago. Even chickens, yes, chickens, are walking bundles of ancient traits. Look closely and you'll see claws on their feet, dinosaur-style hips, and beady eyes that wouldn't be out of place in a prehistoric jungle. And when you see a bird spread its wings and take off into the air, you're witnessing a survivor's tale, a creature that dodged extinction by changing shape, size, and strategy, by turning tools once used for insulation into keys for flight. Feathers, art decorations. They're a fossilized memory dot, so the next time someone asks, "What happened to the dinosaurs?" smile and point to the sky. They didn't vanish. They're still here. Chapter 10. The dinosaur in your backyard. Let's take a step back from the Mesozoic jungles. No volcanoes. No giant predators. No primeval forests or asteroid impacts. Just now. Today, you're sipping coffee on your porch. The sun's rising. Maybe you hear a robin sing, or watch a pigeon peck at crumbs. Maybe a blue jay flashes past your window. Just another ordinary day. But here's the truth. You are surrounded by dinosaurs, and not in a metaphorical way. Not in the "they're kind of like dinosaurs" sense. In a literal, evolutionary, flesh and bone way. Those birds in your backyard are dinosaurs. Let that sink in. That sparrow on your fence? Its ancestors hunted lizards with sickle claws. That crow picking through garbage? Its bloodline survived. A planet-killing asteroid? That woodpecker hammering on a tree? It's part of a lineage that once roamed alongside T-Rex. And if that doesn't blow your mind, nothing will. The idea that birds are dinosaurs isn't just a fun scientific twist. It changes the way we see the world. It collapses 66 million years of history into a single moment, this one. Right now. It means dinosaurs never really went extinct. They just got smaller, lighter, quicker. They shed their teeth and grew beaks. They traded claws for talons, arms for wings. They adapted. And they won. Because today, there are over 10,000 species of birds on Earth. That's more than all known species of mammals, reptiles, and amphibians combined. They live on every continent, from the driest deserts to the frozen poles. They soar over mountains, dive under oceans, sprint across savannas. They do things no other animal can, and they're doing it with the DNA of a dinosaur. But the real wonder isn't just in the biology. It's in the everyday moments. You might see a hawk circle above a field, scanning for mice. And now you can picture a dromaeosaur, a raptor, doing the same 100 million years ago. On two legs, tail outstretched, feathers ruffled. You might see a puffin waddling over rocks, wings tucked, beak aglow. And you can imagine a small feathered dinosaur nesting near a stream, watching over its young. You might see a hummingbird, a shimmering blur of wings and color, and realize you're witnessing a living fossil, a glimpse of evolution's most elegant invention in motion. Even the lowly pigeon, hated by city dwellers, is an evolutionary miracle. It can navigate thousands of miles. It has magnetic field sensors in its brain. It descended from rock doves that may themselves have carried echoes of creatures that once outwitted raptors and troodonts in ancient forests. The connections are everywhere, hidden in plain sight. And it gets better, because we're not just discovering the dinosaur bird link in museums or fossil beds anymore. We're seeing it in behavior, genetics, even modern technology. Birds are becoming models for drone design, for efficient movement, for complex vocalization patterns. Their brains, once thought to be primitive, are now known to rival primates in problem-solving and memory. Some birds can use tools, recognize themselves in mirrors, understand abstract concepts, and communicate in complex social systems. So yes, the descendants of dinosaurs aren't just alive. They're brilliant. And that opens the door to an even bigger realization. Maybe the age of dinosaurs never ended. Maybe we're living in it right now. We just call it the age of birds. But there's a more personal angle to this too. Because once you see birds as dinosaurs, not just connected to them, but as them, the world shifts a little. Your garden isn't just a patch of grass. It's a place where the most resilient creatures in Earth's history are still thriving. Every time a starling chirps, or a raven watches from a branch, or a duck waddles past with her ducklings, you're seeing the survivors of a cataclysmic event, the asteroid that ended the world for nearly all dinosaurs, but not for these few species, feathered, adaptable, quick, held on. They made it, and they became what we now call birds. They remind us that extinction is not always the end, and that survival doesn't mean staying the same. It means changing, often radically, to meet the moment. It means being smart enough, small enough, fast enough, or just plain lucky enough to carry your ancestors' legacy forward. It means finding a way to keep flying, even when the sky itself seems to fall. And if that's not inspiring, what is? So the next time you hear the rustle of wings in the trees, or the call of a crow across a parking lot, take a second, pause, look closer, because that's not just a bird, that's a dinosaur. And it made it. Chapter 11. The color of dinosaurs. Try to imagine a dinosaur. Not the default brown, gray, green version from old textbooks, but a real, living animal. What color was it? That simple question puzzled scientists for decades. For most of history, dinosaur color was pure speculation. Artistic guesses ranged from swampy greens to dusty browns. Some daring paleotists even splashed bright red or blue onto their reconstructions. But the truth? We just didn't know until we did. Because in the early 2000s, something quietly revolutionary happened in paleontology. Scientists discovered that dinosaur color could actually be preserved, not the pigments themselves, but the structures that made those colors. Welcome to the world of melanosomes, microscopic, pigment-containing organelles inside cells. In modern birds, melanosomes come in different shapes depending on the color they produce. Long and skinny melanosomes are usually associated with black or gray tones. Rounder ones correlate with reddish or brownish hues. Iridescent colors? Those are produced by layered arrangements of melanosomes that reflect light, much like in peacocks or hummingbirds. And here's the kicker. These melanosomes can fossilize. So, when paleontologists began re-examining fossilized feathers from feathered dinosaurs, especially those from China's Liaoning province, they weren't just looking at impressions. They were looking at actual chemical shadows of pigment structures, preserved for over 100 million years. One of the first breakthroughs came with Velociraptors, a small, fluffy teropod. Scientists noticed banded patterns along its tail, alternating light and dark rings. Using electron microscopes, they found rounded melanosums indicating rusty reddish tones in the darker areas. This meant Sinosauropteryx likely had a striped, ginger-colored tail, similar to a red panda or a fox. Let that sink in. We were finally beginning to see dinosaurs as they truly looked. Then came Anchiornis, another small feathered theropod, even older than Archaeopteryx. This time, the preserved melanosums across its entire body were analyzed, pixel by pixel, a painstaking months-long process. The result? A nearly full-body color map. Anchiornis had a mostly black body with white wing stripes and a fiery red crest. Imagine a rooster-like dinosaur hopping through Jurassic underbrush, with a punk rock headpiece blazing like a warning light. Suddenly, the past was no longer just bones and guesses. It was becoming vivid, tangible, and the implications went far beyond aesthetics. Color isn't just decorative. In the animal kingdom, color is communication. Bright hues can signal sexual maturity, territorial dominance, or species identity. Camouflage can aid in hunting or survival. Stripes and bands might break up outlines, confuse predators, or even act as warning signals. So when we say Sinosauropteryx had a striped tail, we're not just talking about pattern. We're talking about behavior, environment, and interaction. But it didn't stop there. Melanosums also revealed another secret. iridescence. In Microraptor, the crow-sized four-winged glider we met in earlier chapters, melanosums were found. Tightly packed and layered, just like in modern iridescent birds like starlings or grackles. That told scientists Microraptor likely had shiny black, iridescent feathers, a metallic sheen that would have shimmered in the sun. Was that for display? Attraction? Intimidation? Whatever the case, it shattered the stereotype of drab, earth-toned dinosaurs lurking in murky swamps. These were vivid, dynamic animals, some as visually flashy as the birds we see today. And there's more. Some paleontologists suspect that even larger feathered species, like Utaranus, might have had color patterns, though we don't yet have definitive melanosome analysis for it. Still, given its cold climate, it's possible Utaranus had color shading, darker on top, lighter underneath, a common pattern in modern animals used for camouflage. Think killer whales, deer, or penguins. All use this method to blend into different lighting environments. So the more we study, the more we realize color isn't fluff. It's function. And it tells us not just how these animals looked, but how they lived. Were they flashy like birds of paradise? Cryptic like nightjars? Bold like roosters, or subtle like owls? Even with limited data, the early evidence suggests the full spectrum of possibilities was there, long before the first modern bird ever hatched. But there's still a long way to go. We've only scratched the surface of which dinosaurs we can color code. Melanosome preservation is rare. It requires perfect fossil conditions, rapid burial, fine-grained sediment, and just the right chemical environment. Many fossils simply don't meet those criteria. And even when melanosomes are preserved, reconstructing the full palette is tricky. Different colors can be produced by similar melanosomes. External factors like iridescence or carotenoids, which don't fossilize well, add layers of uncertainty. Still, with every new fossil, the picture sharpens. Each discovery adds a stroke of color to the dinosaur canvas. And someday, maybe soon, we'll be able to look at a fossil and not just say, this is what it looked like, but this is what it really looked like. Because evolution didn't create dinosaurs in grayscale. It painted them in reds, blacks, whites, silvers, oranges, and maybe even blues. It gave them stripes, crusts, gloss, and shimmer. It made them beautiful, functional, alive. And now, for the first time in history, we're learning to see them not as shadows, but as creatures in full color. Chapter 12. The Sound of Feathers. Imagine standing in a primeval forest, 100 million years ago, the trees are ancient conifers. The underbrush crackles softly beneath clawed feet. A breeze stirs the ferns. But you're not listening to rustling leaves. You're waiting for the voices of the past. Then, a call echoes through the trees, not a roar. Not a screech, but a song, sharp, rhythmic, maybe melodic. Something familiar, yet completely alien, because the age of feathered dinosaurs wasn't just about how they looked. It was also about how they sounded. We often imagine dinosaurs as silent, or worse, as monsters bellowing like Hollywood T-Rexes. That's a cinematic invention, not a scientific one. The real acoustic landscape of the Mesozoic may have been far more bird-like than we ever imagined. So, what did feathered dinosaurs sound like? To answer that, we need to look at their closest living relatives, birds and crocodilians. Both groups are descended from ancient archosaurs, just like dinosaurs. And both are vocal. Birds sing, crocodiles grunt, hiss, and rumble. So it's fair to assume they're extinct cousins, especially those with feathers and air sacs. Weren't mute. But how do we reconstruct a voice when soft tissues like vocal cords almost never fossilize? Well, sometimes nature gives us a clue. In 2016, a team of researchers discovered something extraordinary: the fossilized syrinx of a bird-like dinosaur called Velociraptor. This duck-like creature lived around the very end of the Cretaceous period, right before the mass extinction. The syrinx is the organ birds use to produce sound. Unlike our larynx, which sits at the top of the windpipe, the syrinx is located deeper, where the trachea splits into the lungs. It allows birds to produce two tones simultaneously, even harmonize with themselves. The fact that Velociraptors had a syrinx suggests that some feathered dinosaurs could sing, or at least honk, squawk, or buzz using a bird-like system. Even though we haven't found a syrinx in more basal theropods like dromaeosaurs or tyrannosaurs yet, the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The syrinx is made of delicate cartilage, and fossilizing it is incredibly rare. Still, this find cracked open the door to prehistoric vocalization. But what might these sounds have been used for? Plenty. Birds today use vocalization for territorial displays, courtship, alarm calls, group communication, begging calls, and chicks. Feathered dinosaurs, especially social or parental ones, likely use sound in similar ways. We have fossil evidence of nests, brooding behavior, and even group movement in some theropods, suggesting strong social bonds. So imagine an oviraptor softly clucking to its eggs, or a small raptor whistling a call to its siblings through the trees, or even a nocturnal trudont emitting high-pitched contact calls, navigating under moonlight. These aren't far-fetched ideas. Some paleontologists have even suggested that crests in certain species, like Parasaurolophus, a hadrosaur, or Corythosaurus, may have been resonating chambers. In 3D reconstructions, the long curved crests of Parasaurolophus could act like brass instruments, allowing it to project deep, low-frequency sounds across long distances. Were those crests feathers? No, they were bony structures. But they reveal something crucial. Dinosaurs may have been broadcasting to one another across dense forests and floodplains. Now, back to the feathered ones. Even if their vocal range wasn't as wide as modern birds, their anatomy points to some kind of sound production. Hollow bones, air sacs, and complex skull structures all suggest respiratory systems capable of supporting calls. And vocalization doesn't just mean throat sounds. Feathers can make sound too. In modern birds, feathers are often used acoustically. Woodcock tail feathers buzz during flight. Manakins clap their wings in mid-air for sharp, percussive sounds. Owls have silent feathers for stealth. Snipes dive and vibrate their tail feathers to produce eerie winnowing sounds. This opens up an entirely new realm of possibility. Feathered dinosaurs may have sung with their wings, buzzed with their tails, or rustled in rhythmic dances, creating soundscapes far richer than just vocalizations. Picture a courtship display, a male microraptor gliding from tree to tree, feathers fluttering in a choreographed sequence of sight and sound, accompanied by subtle whistles or hums, an aerial performance as vibrant and dynamic as any bird of paradise today. And it wasn't just about mating. In a dense Mesozoic forest, with low visibility and high predator pressure, sound would have been crucial for survival. Group-living dinosaurs may have developed alarm calls, navigation signals, or feeding cues, just like modern cranes, geese, or songbirds. Even body posture matters. Modern birds often puff up, bob their heads, or raise their crests while making sound. These visual amplifiers could have been inherited from dinosaur ancestors who did the same, pairing vocals with dynamic feather displays. And then there's mimicry. Birds like lyrebirds, starlings, and parrots can copy dozens of sounds. Could some intelligent, feathered dinosaurs, like the brainy troodontids, have mimicked other species, tricked predators, or faked calls? We may never know for sure. But brain size, social behavior, and vocal capacity seem closely linked in both birds and dinosaurs. And all signs suggest that the age of dinosaurs wasn't quiet. It was noisy, expressive, communicative, not a prehistoric roarfest, but a dynamic, textured world of honks, clucks, buzzes, and chirps. A world where feathers weren't just for flight or warmth. They were part of a conversation that's been echoing for over 150 million years. And the best part? That conversation continues today. Every time a sparrow sings, a raven croaks, or a cockatoo whistles the theme to Star Wars, you're hearing the echoes of the Mesozoic. The same basic tools, modified syrinxes, air sacs, feather flicks, are still being used by the descendants of dinosaurs to talk, warn, woo, and perform. So the next time you're out in nature, stop and listen. Really listen. You're not just hearing birds. You're hearing dinosaurs speak. Chapter 13, Feathers as Weapons. We think we know what feathers are for. Warmth, flight, maybe showing off during mating season. But that's not the whole story. Because in nature, survival often demands creativity. Evolution repurposes and recycles. Nothing is off limits. So here's a question most paleontologists didn't dare ask until recently. Could some dinosaurs have used their feathers as weapons? At first glance, the idea seems absurd. Feathers are soft, delicate, designed for insulation, camouflage, or aerodynamic precision, not for battle. But look again. Nature is full of examples where soft becomes dangerous. Let's start with birds. In modern species, feathers aren't always passive accessories. They can be defensive tools, intimidation displays, and even active components of attack. Take the hoatzin, a bizarre prehistoric-looking bird from South America. Its chicks are born with claws on their wings, not just for climbing, but for fending off threats. Or consider capercaillies, large woodland grouse known for their aggressive territorial battles. During the breeding season, males will fluff up their neck feathers, fan their tails, and lash out using sharp, stiff wing quills that can leave real injuries. Then there's the spur-winged goose, which has a sharp, bony spur on its wing used to strike at rivals. The feathers don't do the damage, but they're part of the delivery system. In many cases, feathers become part of the visual bluff, flaring out to appear larger, more threatening, or to signal dominance. But in some, especially in close-quarters combat, they can act like bristling armor, a warning backed by real force. And now we return to the dinosaurs. Because if modern birds use feathers for combat, then their ancient relatives might have too, in far more experimental ways. Let's consider Bepiosaurus. This strange therizinosaur had long, ribbon-like protofeathers extending from its arms and tail. These were too rigid for flight, too sparse for insulation. So what were they? 4. Some paleontologists suggest they were display structures. But others think they could have had a startling visual impact during threat postures, fanned out like porcupine quills, flashing bold patterns to intimidate rivals or predators. Now imagine a territorial standoff, two bipiosaurs raising their arms, rattling their feather ribbons, creating a vibrating wave of color and sound. Not so much a weapon as a psychological tactic, intimidation by display. Still not convinced feathers could be used aggressively? Let's look at Psittacosaurus, the parrot-beaked dinosaur. While not a theropod, Psittacosaurus had a row of stiff, bristle-like filaments along its tail. These weren't feathers in the bird sense, but structurally, they're strikingly similar. Could those filaments have been used to whip the air? To startle attackers? Or to reinforce social status? Some scientists think so. The filaments are dense, possibly colored, and would have made a loud swish when flicked, perhaps a warning signal or even a non-lethal strike. And then there's the possibility of feathered shields. In modern birds, wing shields, thick pads of feathers on the wrist or elbow, are used in combat. Roosters will strike each other with these during fights. In feathered theropods, could similarly toughened wing feathers have been used for slapping, blocking, or pushing opponents? Consider Velociraptor. We now know that Velociraptor had asymmetrical arm feathers, not enough for flight, but perfect for display or maneuvering. But during close-quarters combat, like the now famous fossil of a Velociraptor locked in a death grip with a Protoceratops, could those feathers have played a stabilizing or shielding role? Maybe even a way to confuse prey, flaring the feathers, to mislead, distract, or blindside a target just long enough for the killing claw to land. It's speculative, but grounded in biology. And here's the real twist. Some paleontologists believe certain feather structures may have evolved partially as defensive displays first, before being co-opted for flight. Why? Because bright, oversized or exaggerated features often evolve in animals that live in dangerous, competitive environments, where the ability to intimidate can mean the difference between survival and extinction. Think about birds of paradise. They live in environments where predation risk is lower. That gives them freedom to evolve ridiculous, elaborate feathers for courtship. But in high-risk environments, such displays must serve a dual purpose: courtship and defense. That dual role might have applied to feathered dinosaurs like Caudipteryx, with its large tail fan and flashy feather arrays. Were those feathers for mating dances? Or did they double as threat signals? We don't know for sure, but we do know that the boundary between show and strike is thin in nature. In species like cassowaries, that line disappears completely. Cassowaries, those terrifying modern avian dinosaurs, have a tall helmet-like casque, dagger-like claws, and powerful legs. When threatened, they don't just flash feathers. They attack violently. Their body plumage is dense and coarse, more like armor than insulation. It may not slice flesh, but it supports a body built for aggression. They are living proof that feathers and ferocity are not mutually exclusive. So, could ancient dinosaurs have used feathers in a similar way? Could a flash of tail plumage or a whip of arm feathers have been the Mesozoic equivalent of a warning slap or a threat display? Absolutely. And as we uncover more fossils, better preserved, more detailed, we may find microscopic damage patterns on feathers, breaks, notches, bends, evidence of impact, of wear, of contact, because feathers weren't always about elegance or beauty. Sometimes they were weapons of survival. And that's what makes them extraordinary. They weren't just tools for warmth or flight or flirtation. They were multifunctional marvels, lightweight, adaptable, expressive, and yes, sometimes dangerous. So the next time someone asks, what good is a feather on a predator? You can smile and answer, it's not just good. It might have been deadly. Chapter 14. From fluff to armor. When you think of armor, you probably imagine steel plates, thick scales, maybe bone-hard spikes. Feathers? Not exactly the first material. That comes to mind. And yet, evolution rarely follows our expectations. What if feathers, those delicate structures designed for flight, warmth, or display, could also act as a kind of biological armor? It sounds contradictory, but in the world of dinosaurs, contradictions were the norm. To understand how this worked, we have to rewind. Feathers didn't start off as flight tools. In fact, the earliest feather-like structures probably looked nothing like today's sleek bird plumage. They were short, bristly filaments. Some scientists call them proto-feathers, simple hollow tubes of keratin sprouting from the skin, more like fur than feathers. At first, they probably served a basic purpose: thermal insulation, keeping small, fast-moving predators warm in the fluctuating climates of the Jurassic and Cretaceous. But even at that early stage, these filaments had structure. And structure is where function begins to evolve. Some dinosaurs had dense coats of these bristles, especially around the neck and tail. They weren't fluffy for aesthetic purposes. They formed thick, overlapping layers. In some cases, the filaments were stiff, even quill-like. And stiff, quill-like structures are harder to penetrate. Let's take a look at a prime example: Psittacosaurus. This small, parrot-beaked dinosaur didn't fly, and it wasn't covered in down. But it had a row of long, stiff, hair-like filaments erupting from its tail. Some scientists believe these filaments, which could reach up to 16 centimeters long, were display features. But others point out that their spacing, rigidity, and density could have offered a form of passive protection, a sort of primitive tail shield. Imagine a predator lunging at Psittacosaurus from behind, only to meet a bristling fan of needle-like filaments. Not enough to injure, but perhaps just enough to deter. In modern animals, we see similar strategies. Porcupines use modified hairs, quills, as active defense. Pangolins have hardened scales formed from keratin. Hedgehogs roll into balls, presenting nothing but spines. Even in birds, some feather structures are surprisingly tough. Look at cassowaries. Their plumage isn't fluffy, it's coarse, hair-like and dense. It protects them as they charge through thick jungle underbrush, and likely helps deflect minor attacks. Or consider vultures and condors, birds that feed in bloody, competitive environments. Their neck feathers are sparse but tough, protecting vulnerable skin during feeding frenzies. Feathers, when modified the right way, can be shock absorbers, barriers, even deflection tools. And there's another possibility: armor through illusion. Some feathered dinosaurs, like Utyrannus, were covered in long, shaggy protofeathers, not defensive on their own. But collectively, they might have made the dinosaur appear larger, more intimidating, or even difficult to target precisely. Predators often go for the neck or flanks. If that target is obscured by a wall of fluff, the bite might land wrong, or not at all. It's not armor in the traditional sense, but it's still protection. We can also look to Therizinosaurs, the strangest of the bunch. These were large, pot-bellied, herbivorous theropods with feathers and massive claws. Though their claws were likely for foraging and defense, some species show evidence of dense, stiff feather coverage along the arms and body. Again, some scientists argue this was display. Others propose an added layer of thermal regulation. But could these feathered arms, when raised, act like feathered shields in the face of predators? Could slashing claws and bristling arms work together to intimidate or deflect? There's another twist in this story. As feathers evolved, scales didn't disappear. They adapted too. Modern birds have both feathers on their wings, heads, and tails, but scales on their feet and legs. Why? Because those areas still need durability, traction, and protection. In some feathered dinosaurs, we see the same pattern: feathers on top, scales below. It's the evolutionary sweet spot: warmth and display where needed, toughness and protection where it counts. So instead of asking feathers or armor, the better question might be, why not both? Let's step back for a moment and imagine a small, Feathered theropod like sin or nit, Hosaurus. It's stalking prey in a dense forested environment. Its body is covered in downy feathers, but its limbs, particularly the forearms and lower legs, have stiffer, more structured plumage. These could help with maneuverability, but also act as padding or even bluffing displays, if threatened. It might fan its arms wide, creating a larger silhouette and shielding its flanks. A strike from a predator might land, but glance off the cushioning of layered feathers, enough to buy time to escape. In this context, feathers become a kind of passive armor, not designed for blocking swords, but for absorbing shocks, confusing predators, and manipulating visual threats. Let's not forget the power of deception. In the animal kingdom, mimicry and illusion are as effective as armor. Some birds fluff up their feathers to look larger. Others flash eye spots to scare predators. In feathered dinosaurs, early evidence suggests they may have done the same, using patterns, stripes, and contrasting feather colors to warn off attackers or blend into shadows. It's a feathered camouflage system, a living cloak of illusion. And then there's the big picture. Feathers are modular. Unlike scales, which are rigid and limited, feathers can evolve into dozens of forms: fluffy, stiff, wide, narrow, downy, spiny, iridescent, layered. This modularity gave feathered dinosaurs a toolkit unlike anything scales alone could offer. Some used it for flight, some for heat, some for courtship, and some, maybe more than we think, used it to survive attacks, not by being invulnerable, but by being clever. By using fluff to buy time, deflect, or mislead. By mixing softness with strategy. So yes, feathers started soft, but under the right pressures, evolution made them tough. Not armor in the medieval sense, but armor in the evolutionary sense. Flexible, lightweight, and full of surprises, because sometimes survival isn't about having the thickest skin. It's about being hard to catch, hard to hurt, hard to understand. Feathers weren't just nature's great invention for flight. They were nature's Swiss Army knife. Warm, loud, beautiful, and maybe just tough enough to turn the tide in a fight. Chapter 15. The Arctic Dinosaurs. Close your eyes and picture the Arctic. You probably imagine icy wastelands, endless snow, polar bears drifting on ice floes, maybe a few desperate foxes and hares. Now, try to picture dinosaurs living there, not just passing through. Thriving, nesting, hunting, raising their young in conditions most animals today would never tolerate. Sounds impossible? It's not, because the fossil record has spoken, and it's colder, darker, and far more feathered than anyone ever imagined. Let's rewind to the late Cretaceous period, around 70 million years ago. Back then, the Earth's climate was warmer, yes, but that doesn't mean the poles were tropical. The high latitudes still endured months of winter darkness, freezing temperatures, and harsh seasonal swings. And yet, that's exactly where we find them, polar dinosaurs. In Alaska's Prince Creek Formation, a site just 300 miles from the modern Arctic Circle, paleontologists have unearthed bones, teeth, and tracks from a stunning range of dinosaurs, including hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, theropods, and yes, even troodontids. But here's the catch. They weren't just migratory visitors. Evidence from bone growth patterns and fossilized nesting sites suggests these dinosaurs lived year-round in these environments. They hatched, grew, and possibly overwintered in darkness and cold. And if there's one adaptation that could have made this lifestyle possible, it's feathers. Let's focus on the small theropods, the likely feathered group. Species like Troodon, which has become an Arctic poster child, are now believed to have been permanent residents of these northern regions. And Troodon wasn't a bulky, cold-resistant herbivore. It was a gracile predator with large eyes, long legs, and bird-like features. The large eyes weren't just for show. They likely offered night vision, or at least excellent low-light sensitivity. Important if you're hunting in a land that goes dark for months. But how did it stay warm? Feathers. Most paleontologists now believe Truden was covered in insulating proto-feathers, possibly even multi-layered plumage, similar to how modern birds in Siberia or the Arctic have denser winter coats. Think about that. A dinosaur with a winter coat. Not as a rare exception, but as a standard feature. These feathers weren't for flight. Truden didn't fly. But in the biting Arctic wind, they could have trapped body heat, shielded vital organs, and even helped shield eggs or young during the nesting season. And Truden wasn't alone. In the same polar regions, we found fossil evidence of Dromaeosaurs, the raptor family. Some of these, like Dromaeosaurus albertensis, likely had feathers too. These predators, smaller than Truden but stockier, could have used feathers not just for warmth, but for nest insulation or thermoregulatory balance as they stalked prey. Through snow-dusted underbrush, even herbivores like juvenile hadrosaurs may have benefited from partial feathering or fuzz-like structures, though this remains speculative. But feathers weren't the only Arctic superpower. These dinosaurs also had slow-growing bones, as seen in cross-sections, an adaptation similar to modern animals that survive seasonal food scarcity. Growth would pause during the darkest, coldest months, then resume in the spring like a built-in survival rhythm, and many species show signs of large, complex brains, especially in theropods. The kind of brain that could learn, adapt, and solve problems in a changing environment. Now imagine this. It's deep winter. The sun hasn't risen in weeks. Temperatures are near freezing. The forest is silent, but not empty. A feathered Truden carefully steps through a snow-laced clearing, hunting for small mammals or scavenging carcasses. Its dense plumage keeps it warm. Its large eyes scan the dim light. Nearby, a shallow nest lined with plant matter and maybe even feathers shelters eggs or hatchlings tucked away under the snow. This isn't a fantasy. It's a real, evidence-based reconstruction of life at the top of the world, not by mammals or birds, but by dinosaurs. But here's the kicker. Many of the dinosaurs that survived longer than expected in the fossil record, those that hung on just before the asteroid struck, were living in higher latitudes. Some paleontologists now speculate that feathered polar dinosaurs may have had a survival advantage. Their feathers made them adaptable, their brains made them clever, and their cold weather skills made them resilient. In other words, the feathered dinosaurs of the Arctic weren't just anomalies. They might have been the future had history gone differently. In fact, some researchers even propose that early birds, small, flight-capable, warm-blooded, and feathered, may have originated or evolved key adaptations in cooler, seasonal environments like these. So rather than being a fringe group, the feathered Arctic dinosaurs might have been the blueprint for the avian survivors that would one day inherit the Earth. Think about how poetic that is. While the great sauropods and horned giants of warmer regions died out, it was the small, feathered, Arctic-adapted creatures that endured, that evolved, that took to the skies, and now they're everywhere. In your garden, on your roof, singing in the trees, because their ancestors learned to live in the cold. Today, modern birds in polar regions still carry the torch. Penguins, ptarmigans, owls, gulls, all shaped by millions of years of Arctic survival. And their great-great-grand relatives? They were the ones who stared down months of darkness, nurtured their young under frozen skies, and did it all with nothing but instincts, intelligence, and a coat of feathers. That's not just survival. That's triumph. So the next time someone asks if dinosaurs could have survived an extinction event, just tell them this. Some of them already had, and they were wearing coats. Chapter 16. Extreme Makeovers. Dino Edition. Take a moment and picture a dinosaur, not just any dinosaur, but one from your childhood. A T-Rex with rugged brown skin and crocodilian scales. A Velociraptor, sleek and lizard-like, sprinting across the desert like in a certain blockbuster film. Maybe even a Triceratops or Stegosaurus, lumbering through ferns and hues of swampy green and gray. Now forget all of that because as feathers entered the fossil record, paleontology began experiencing something more than a scientific update. It went through a visual revolution. Feathers didn't just change a few minor details, they repainted the canvas of prehistoric life. Suddenly, the creatures we thought we knew had plumes, crests, fuzz, fans, and flair. The transformations were dramatic, even shocking. And not everyone welcomed them, but the evidence didn't care about comfort zones. It all started subtly. At first, fossilized impressions of skin around theropods suggested scaly textures, confirming what many expected. Dinosaurs were reptiles, after all, right? Then came a trickle of strange finds from northeastern China in the late 1990s. Delicate impressions of filamentous structures surrounding small theropod skeletons. They weren't scales, they weren't muscles, they looked fuzzy, some thought. It was a mistake, maybe mold, maybe plant debris. But as more specimens emerged, Sinosauropteryx, Bapiosaurus, Caudipteryx, the trend couldn't be denied. These dinosaurs had protofeathers, simple, unbranched filaments at first, but unmistakably feather-like. And in some cases, fully formed feathers, complete with barbs and branching veins. Suddenly, dinosaurs weren't just fearsome lizards. They were starting to look like prehistoric birds, or, if you prefer, birds were starting to look like miniature dinosaurs. This sparked a revolution in paleoart and a backlash in popular culture. When illustrators began depicting velociraptors with feathers, people were outraged. "They don't look scary anymore," some fans cried. "They look like angry chickens." And they kind of did. But that didn't make them any less dangerous. The real velociraptor wasn't the man-sized monster from movies. It was about the size of a turkey, fast, cunning, and likely covered in feathers from head to tail. With long wing-like arms, a feathered tail fan for balance, and perhaps even a display crest. It was a predator that belonged more in the bird house than the reptile pit. And it wasn't alone. Species once imagined as scaly or reptilian were now getting extreme makeovers. Take Uranus, the feathered tyrant of China. At nearly 30 feet long and weighing over 3,000 pounds. It was a cousin of T-Rex, and it had a full coat of feathers. Not the sleek kind for flight, but long, shaggy proto-feathers. The kind that could insulate, intimidate, and display. This discovery shattered the belief that only small dinosaurs had feathers. If a predator that size could be feathered, what about T-Rex itself? We haven't found feathers directly preserved with T-Rex fossils yet, but skin impressions show a mix. Some scalier patches, but enough ambiguity to leave the question open. Could T-Rex have had patches of feathers in youth? A feathered mane? A downy coat as a juvenile that shed in adulthood? Possibly. Some artists have dared to show it. Others went even further. Species like Therizinosaurus, the bizarre, pot-bellied, plant-eating theropod with meter-long claws, went from prehistoric sloth lizard to giant feathery nightmare, with feathers draping over its body, a beak, and a possible pygostyle-like tail fan. It now looks more like a cross between a goose, a bear, and something out of mythology. And let's not forget ornithomimids, the ostrich-like bird mimics, like Struthiomis and Gallimimus. Once drawn as sleek-skinned runners, they're now decked out in full feather coats with wing-like arms, even though they couldn't fly. In fact, one ornithomimus specimen shows a clear transition in plumage, downy fuzz in juveniles, and full wing feathers in adults, even though the adults didn't fly. Why? Possibly for display, temperature regulation, or even mating rituals. In just a few years, dinosaurs went from Jurassic Park to Jurassic Vogue. But the shift didn't stop at predators. Even some herbivores got feathered reboots, while most of the big-bodied herbivorous dinosaurs likely retained scaly skin, like Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, and Stegosaurus. A few surprises popped up. One major shock was Colindodromus, discovered in Siberia in 2014. This small ornithischian, not a theropod, showed both scales and feather-like structures, including branching filaments and compound structures similar to down. Why is that significant? Because it suggested that feathers or protofeathers might not have evolved just in theropods, but were possibly ancestral to all dinosaurs, or at least widespread across many clades. In other words, feathered dinosaurs weren't a weird exception. They may have been the norm. So what happened? Why did popular images of dinosaurs fall so far behind? Part of it is momentum. Once an image, like a scaly T-Rex, is cemented in culture, it's hard to replace. Another part is aesthetics. People associate feathers with fragility, birds with innocence. It's hard to imagine a predator being terrifying when it has fluff on its head. But here's the irony. Birds can be terrifying. Just ask anyone who's faced down a cassowary, a dive-bombing goose, or an owl in full strike mode. The feathers don't soften the threat. They amplify it, adding color, motion, and menace. Feathers allowed dinosaurs to evolve into smarter, faster, more versatile creatures. They were about insulation, yes, but also about aggression, camouflage, seduction, and deception. They made dinosaurs adaptable, and adaptability, in evolution, is power. So when you see a modern Paleoart rendering, a feathered raptor with a flash of red crest, a shaggy tyrannosaur striding through the snow, or a dancing caudipteryx with a fan of peacock-like tail feathers, know that you're looking at a truer dinosaur than anything Hollywood ever gave us. This isn't a soft rewrite of the past. It's a correction, and one backed by stone, by science, and by the simple truth that nature is always stranger and more beautiful than we imagine. Dinosaurs didn't just go extinct, they evolved into birds. And in doing so, they gave us clues to their past, in feathers, in DNA, in behaviors. And with every fossil dig, every feather impression, and every bold artistic reconstruction, we peel away one more layer of the old lie. Dinosaurs were never just dull, scaly beasts. They were striking, dynamic, and sometimes utterly fabulous. Chapter 17. The Feathery Death from Above. If you've ever watched a hawk drop out of the sky, talons spread, silent as a shadow until the moment it strikes, you've glimpsed one of nature's most lethal blueprints. But that blueprint? It wasn't designed yesterday. It's been around for millions of years. Forged not in modern skies, but in prehistoric forests, on ancient cliffs, and yes, even in the feathered arms of dinosaurs. Because long before birds perfected the aerial ambush, some dinosaurs were already experimenting with the art of the airborne kill. And those dinosaurs? They had feathers. Let's talk about Microraptor, a name you might have heard before, but not like this. Microraptor was small, about the size of a crow or small cat, but it was armed with curved claws, serrated teeth, and most unusually, feathers on all four limbs. That's right, not just wings, but leg wings and a long feathered tail. It wasn't quite a bird, not quite a glider, and not quite like anything alive today. At first, scientists didn't know what to make of it. Was it climbing, gliding? Did it flap? Then came the fossilized stomach contents, one with lizard bones, another with a bird, another with a fish. This wasn't some insect eater living in the trees. Microraptor was a versatile predator, dropping down from the canopy to ambush prey from above. And it did so in silence, feathers muffling air disturbance, just like owls today. Its killing strategy: climb, wait, glide, strike. Sound familiar? It's the exact hunting style used by modern raptors, owls, hawks, eagles, perfected over time, but born in a much earlier world. Microraptor wasn't just the death from above. It was the prototype, and it's not alone. Let's add Anchiornis to the roster, another feathered dinosaur from the late Jurassic. about 160 million years ago. Even older than Microraptor, Anchiornis had long arm feathers and leg feathers, suggesting gliding or flutter-assisted leaps. But the real kicker? Fossilized pigment cells in Anchiornis feathers show color patterns, blacks, whites, and even hints of red, possibly for camouflage, possibly for intimidation, possibly for both. Now picture this. A small mammal scurries across a branch. From the shadow of the leaves, Anchiornis dives, not in a straight line, but a controlled glide. Tail feathers acting like a rudder, arm feathers flared. It strikes, claws first, jaws snapping shut. A moment later, it's gone, predator and prey vanishing into the foliage. It sounds like a scene out of a modern rainforest, but it happened over 150 million years ago. And these feathered aerial predators didn't just hunt small fry, some likely hunted other dinosaurs, hatchlings, juveniles, maybe even other gliders. Because when you evolve the ability to descend on your prey from above, gravity becomes your ally. Surprise becomes your superpower. And feathers? They're your flight suit. Even more fascinating is the way feathers shape these predators' bodies, not just for movement, but for silence. Modern owls have serrated leading edges on their wing feathers, which disrupt air turbulence and let them fly noiselessly. While we don't have feather microstructure preserved that finely in Microraptor or Anchiornis, it's possible that similar principles applied, not because they planned it, but because evolution shaped the quietest flyers into the most successful hunters. Natural selection loves stealth. And feathers deliver it better than any scale ever could. Now consider Raja navis, a small, bird-like dinosaur from Madagascar, likely capable of short bursts of powered flight. It had flight feathers, a long tail, and sickle claws like a raptor. Was it swooping down to pin prey like a hawk? Possibly. Even more tantalizing is the idea that multiple dinosaur lineages were independently experimenting with aerial ambush strategies, gliding, flapping, perching, diving, all with feathers at the center of their design. In fact, some researchers now believe the transition to flight didn't come from the ground up, but from the trees down. That is, small feathered dinosaurs may have first evolved feathers for climbing, gliding, and hunting in forest canopies long before they could ever truly fly. Feathers, in this model, weren't for flight, they were for ambush. And isn't that the perfect evolutionary twist? We tend to think of feathers as soft, benign, the stuff of pillows and nesting. But in the hands or claws of the right predator, they became the ultimate stealth tech, a tool for falling from the sky like a ghost. And here's the creepiest part. Some of these feathered predators had elongated flight feathers on their hind legs, turning their entire bodies into four-winged death machines. Not just silent, not just sudden, but aerodynamically engineered to kill. And the tradition didn't end with Microraptor. As birds evolved, many inherited the blueprints of these feathered killers and modified them. Hawks and eagles gained strength and eyesight. Owls specialized in silence and stealth. Falcons became living missiles. But the DNA, the strategy, the foundation? It was all built by dinosaurs. So when a modern raptor stoops from the sky to strike its target with deadly precision, it's not just a bird doing what birds do. It's a dinosaur, perfected. It's the echo of a Microraptor gliding through prehistoric trees. It's a memory, millions of years old, still living in feathers. And here's the big takeaway. Feathers didn't just make flight possible. They made aerial predation possible. Before powered flight, before long-distance soaring, before migration, feathers gave dinosaurs a new axis of attack, the vertical. They no longer needed to chase prey on the ground. They could descend from above, faster, quieter, deadlier. And that, more than any single adaptation, may have been the moment when birds and their dinosaur ancestors took control of the sky. Because once you control the high ground, you change the game. Forever. Chapter 18. The Survivors Among Us. There's a moment, dramatic, tragic, and pivotal, that every dinosaur documentary ends with. The asteroid, 66 million years ago, a chunk of space rock the size of a city struck the Earth, near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The explosion vaporized life for hundreds of miles. Mega tsunamis thundered across oceans. Fires scorched the skies. And within months, the global climate plummeted into darkness and cold, an extinction-level event. And just like that, the age of dinosaurs was over, or so we used to think, because the real story is far more fascinating, and a lot more feathery. Not all dinosaurs perished in the aftermath. Amid the chaos, amid the collapse of ecosystems and vanishing food chains, one small group of feathered theropods survived, not just by luck, by adaptation. By already having the tools to endure in a broken world. They were birds, not just bird-like dinosaurs, but actual birds. And they didn't just survive. They exploded into every ecosystem on Earth. Let's break this down. By the end of the Cretaceous, birds had already evolved from their dinosaur ancestors. Species like Ethionis, Hesperornis, and Asteriornis were thriving. They had beaks, flight, feathers, and in some cases even teeth. Some were divers, some flyers, some ground dwellers. They lived alongside giants. But they weren't the giants, and that may have saved them. Smaller body size meant lower food requirements. Flight allowed for escape. Feathers provided insulation during the post-impact cooling. More importantly, early birds had diverse diets, seeds, insects, even detritus. That meant when plants stopped growing and most food chains collapsed, birds could scavenge or hibernate on what remained. They also laid small eggs, matured quickly, and likely had social nesting behavior, all crucial advantages when rapid recovery was needed. But it wasn't all birds. Fossil evidence suggests that only certain lineages survived. The Enantiornithines, a large diverse group of prehistoric birds, died out with the non-avian dinosaurs. The survivors belonged to the Neornithine group, the ancestors of modern birds. What made them different? Possibly their ecology. Possibly their nesting behavior. Possibly sheer dumb luck. But one thing is clear, they carried forward the legacy of dinosaurs. Every time you see a sparrow flit through a city street, or a hawk circle overhead, you're watching a living, breathing dinosaur, not a metaphor, not poetic license. A real, direct descendant of the very creatures that once ruled the earth. Let that sink in. Tyrannosaurus rex is gone. Velociraptor is gone. But their cousins are still here. And they're everywhere. From pigeons on your balcony to penguins on Antarctic shores, from parrots mimicking speech to owls gliding through midnight forests, all are descendants of the survivors. And feathers are the common thread. Feathers weren't just the quirky quills of a few prehistoric predators. They were a genetic inheritance, one so versatile, so effective, that it carried a group of creatures through the worst mass extinction since the Permian. And here's the incredible part. That inheritance didn't stop evolving. Modern birds still use feathers for warmth, flight, and mating displays. Yes, but also for camouflage, communication, intimidation, and even silent killing. As in owls, feathers have adapted to every environment on Earth. Deserts, oceans, jungles, tundras. In peacocks, they became flamboyant signals. In penguins, sleek wetsuits. In vultures, rugged tools for soaring for hours. In hummingbirds, iridescent engines for hovering. This isn't just survival. It's domination. Birds are now the most diverse group of land vertebrates on the planet. Over 10,000 species and counting. And they did it all with feathers. That's the twist ending few saw coming. The so-called age of mammals we live in. It's not just that. It's also the age of birds, the age of surviving, dinosaurs. And while we've spent centuries digging through rock and piecing together bones, The greatest evolutionary success story was perched outside our windows all along. We used to think of birds as fragile, cute, decorative. But look closer. Their ancestors were the kings of the Cretaceous. And their feathers, once just a curiosity in amber, turned out to be the ultimate key to survival. So the next time you see a robin on a branch or a crow watching you from a wire, don't just think bird. Think dinosaur. Think survivor. Because the age of dinosaurs never really ended. It just took flight. Chapter 19. The future of feathered dinosaurs. We tend to think of dinosaurs as fossils, creatures trapped in stone, locked in the past. But that's only half the truth. Asterisk, because if birds are living dinosaurs, then dinosaurs are still evolving, right now, all around us. And what's more exciting than the idea that the story isn't over? Let's imagine for a moment, not a Jurassic Park scenario where science resurrects the past, but a future shaped by natural selection, genetic drift, and yes, feathers. What might birds become next? Could some of them evolve back into creatures that rival the ferocity, intelligence, or size of their dinosaurian ancestors? Well, they already have. In miniature, take corvids, crows, ravens, jays. They're some of the most intelligent animals on Earth. They use tools, solve puzzles, recognize faces, and even hold grudges. Their brains, in proportion to their bodies, rival those of great apes. If Velociraptor had a modern cousin in terms of smarts, it'd be a raven. And then there's the shrike, an adorable songbird with a killer's instinct. It catches prey, insects, rodents, even other birds, and impales them on thorns or barbed wire to store for later. A practice eerily reminiscent of some raptors, or the secretary bird, a long-legged predator that stomps venomous snakes to death with pinpoint accuracy. Or the cassowary, a flightless feathered relic of ancient forests with talons that can slice open a human abdomen. That's not an exaggeration, it's happened. These aren't just birds. These are dinosaurs in waiting, shaped by 66 million years of evolution, and still adapting. But what happens next? If the world changes drastically, catastrophically, the animals best suited to survive will shape the future. And birds, with their feathers, flight, adaptability, and intelligence, are strong contenders. Consider urban evolution. Pigeons and crows are learning to thrive in cities. They exploit trash systems, cross roads at crosswalks, and even ride public transit. Some birds are evolving shorter wings for better maneuverability between buildings. Others are changing their songs to rise above urban noise. They're not just surviving, they're evolving with us. Or think of climate change. As temperatures rise, as habitats shift, birds are adapting their migration routes, nesting behaviors, even beak sizes to handle new heat levels or food sources. In Australia, parrots are showing larger beaks, possibly to dissipate heat more efficiently. In the Arctic, birds like snow buntings are altering their breeding schedules to match thaw patterns. Feathers are still proving to be one of the most flexible tools evolution has to offer. Insulation, camouflage, communication, even thermoregulation. Stretch this forward. What if in some far future epoch, mammals decline or even disappear, and birds inherit the dominant ecological roles? Could some grow larger again? Could flightless birds re-evolve into apex predators? Could the oceans, skies, and forests be ruled once again by feathered titans? It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. We've already seen it happen once before, during the Paleogene, the period immediately after the dinosaurs' extinction. Large flightless birds like Gastornis, Brontunes, and Feruzricos filled the predator gap. Some stood 10 feet tall. Some had hooked beaks and could crush bone. They were called terror birds, and they were exactly what the name suggests. Dinosaurs reborn through evolution. For millions of years, they were the top predators in South America, until climate changes and invading mammalian carnivores eventually outcompeted them. But if mammals falter again, birds could rise. And this time, they'd be building on 66 million years of practice. Now, let's mix in something even stranger. Genetic engineering. In labs today, scientists are actively working to reverse engineer bird traits to understand their dinosaur origins. Using tools like CRISPR, researchers have modified chicken embryos to grow snout-like structures, reduced tails, and even teeth-like projections, not to create monsters, but to trace evolution steps. It's called evo-devo, evolutionary developmental biology. And while it's tightly controlled, it opens the door to a provocative question. Could we one day sculpt future birds, or even dinosaurs, intentionally? Imagine a world where humans partner with birds to co-engineer traits, where scavenger crows assist with waste management, where falcons monitor drone traffic, where genetically modified parrots develop advanced communication capabilities. It's speculative, but not impossible, because we're already reshaping evolution, whether we mean to or not. Our cities, our climate, our technologies, they're all pressure points, and birds are adapting rapidly in response. In the future, dinosaurs may not look like Jurassic Park's fantasies. They might wear hoodies of feathers, glide between skyscrapers, hunt in packs through forest corridors, or mimic our own behaviors with eerie precision. Feathers are their toolkit. We've just begun to scratch the surface of what they can become. So no, the story of feathered dinosaurs doesn't end with fossils in a museum. It stretches forward into cities, into jungles, into labs and skies and wild places we haven't even imagined. And maybe, one day, future generations will look up and see not a bird, but something bigger, something bolder, something ancient, evolved, and feathered, and say, that's a dinosaur. Chapter 20. The truth revealed. At the start of this journey, we posed a simple question. Were dinosaurs covered in feathers? But now as we reach the end, the question has evolved into something much deeper, because the answer isn't just yes, it's yes. And it changes everything. Let's rewind. For most of the 20th century, dinosaurs were painted with scales, imagined as slow-moving, cold-blooded monsters, more like giant lizards than anything else. The textbooks told us they were extinct, gone, done, but feathers cracked that illusion. And once the first thread was pulled, the whole tapestry unraveled. It began with strange fossils in China, impressions of fluff, of filaments, of veins. Then came the big names: Velociraptor, with quill knobs on its arm bones; Uteranus, a shaggy tyrannosaur; Anchiornis, colored like a magpie. These weren't reconstructions. These were facts, etched in stone. Suddenly, the old image of dinosaurs looked wrong, outdated, incomplete, shallow. Feathers weren't an accessory. They were a revolution. They weren't just for flight. They were for warmth, for camouflage, for courtship, for threat displays, for survival. And they were everywhere. Small theropods, covered. Giant predators, feathered at least in patches. Even herbivores, once thought immune to fluff, showed signs of filament-like structures. Feathers weren't rare. They were the norm. And once you accept that, something clicks. The old paradigm of dinosaurs as overgrown reptiles collapses. In its place, we find a new truth. Dinosaurs were closer to birds than to lizards. They were warm-blooded, fast-moving, intelligent, and yes, in many cases feathered. That's not a tweak. That's a rewrite, a revolution in how we understand Earth's greatest creatures. And the implications ripple outward. Because if dinosaurs weren't just cold-blooded monsters, then how we view their lives, their hunting, their parenting, their migrations, their evolution, changes too. Suddenly, a velociraptor becomes less like a reptilian horror, and more like a predatory bird of prey, stalking with talon precision, possibly in coordinated groups, perhaps even using communication calls. Suddenly, a theropod nest isn't just a pile of eggs. It's a scene of care and protection, with feathers shielding embryos from cold. Possibly even brooding, like modern birds. Suddenly, survival isn't just strength and size, it's adaptability. And feathers gave dinosaurs that edge. Insulation. In cold climates, check. Visual signaling in dense forests? Check. A pathway to flight and the colonization of the skies? Absolutely. Feathers turned dinosaurs from ground-bound giants into aviators. In one lineage, the birds carried that legacy forward through extinction. Now, they are the most diverse group of land vertebrates on the planet. From finches to falcons, from hummingbirds to hornbills, they are dinosaurs, evolved, not fossils, not ghosts. Living relics with beating hearts and flapping wings. And perhaps the most powerful truth of all is this: dinosaurs never truly went extinct. That asteroid, it ended an era, yes. But it didn't end the story. Feathers were the bridge. Across continents, across climates, across cataclysm, and they're still with us. Look outside, the robins singing on your windowsill, the hawk circling above a field, the penguin diving beneath the ice. All are descendants of survivors, of creatures that once roamed with Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus. This isn't just poetic. It's scientific fact. You live in a world still shaped by dinosaurs. Every bird is a monument to evolution's endurance. A reminder that some of the most fearsome, beautiful, bizarre creatures Earth has ever known are still here. So when we ask, were dinosaurs covered in feathers? What we're really asking is, what does that mean for how we understand life, survival, and deep time? And the answer? It means that extinction isn't the end, that adaptation is power, that the past is never truly past. It just evolves. Feathers weren't just a footnote in dinosaur history. They were the final chapter in one story, and the first chapter in another. A chapter that's still being written by every beak that cracks a seed, every wind that cuts through the sky, every song that breaks the dawn. So the next time someone says dinosaurs are gone, you'll know the truth. They're perched above us. They're walking among us. They're singing in the trees, and they're covered in feathers.